Tonight, December 10th, 2025, a crater where a family lived. 17 civilians dead in Dnipro, 4 of them children. A Russian missile, precision-guided, deliberately targeted, slammed into a residential building at 3:47 inches the morning. And for the first time in this war, the United States doesn't just condemn, it warns. Material consequences, the National Security Council says. Not diplomatic language, not carefully worded statements. A threat. Ukraine hears it, and within 24 hours, fires back deep into Russian territory. This isn't another day in a long war. This is a threshold, a line crossed, a moment when the rules change. And what happens next could determine whether this war ends or whether it engulfs us all. Stay with me. We need to understand what just happened. Let me set the scene. We're approaching 4 years since Russian tanks rolled across Ukraine's border. 4 years of artillery barrages, drone strikes, trench warfare, and mass casualties. 4 years of a conflict that was supposed to last days but has become Europe's longest war since 1945. The front lines have barely moved in 18 months. Bakhmut, Avdiivka, Robotyne, names that mean nothing to most Americans but represent months of brutal fighting over a few kilometers of scorched earth. This is attritional warfare, the kind where victory is measured not in territory gained, but in how long you can keep bleeding before the other side bleeds out first. Russia has lost an estimated 450,000 soldiers killed or wounded. Ukraine's losses are smaller but devastating for a nation of 37 million. Both economies are militarized. Both societies are exhausted. Both governments are locked in a death grip neither can afford to lose. But something shifted this week, not on the battlefield. In Washington, because for nearly 4 years, American policy has been consistent. Arm Ukraine, sanction Russia, avoid direct confrontation. It's been a strategy of containment. Give Ukraine enough to survive, but not enough to win decisively. Enough to bleed Russia, but not enough to provoke nuclear escalation. That strategy depends on restraint, on norms, on an unspoken understanding that certain things like deliberately massacring civilians in their sleep will trigger consequences beyond press releases. The Dnipro strike tested that assumption, and the American response suggests the assumption held. Why does this matter? Because wars don't end when one side loses. They end when one side decides continuing isn't worth the cost. And for 3 years, Russia has calculated that it can absorb Western outrage, weather sanctions, and keep grinding forward. The U.S. warning. And Ukraine's immediate military response signals that calculation might be wrong. This is a pressure point. A moment when the trajectory of the war could bend or break. Let's examine what happened. December 8th, 2025. 3:47 a.m. Dnipro. A city of nearly 1 million people in central Ukraine, 150 kilometers from the nearest active combat zone. Far enough that life has found a rhythm. Markets open, schools run, people sleep until they don't. The weapon is an Iskander-M ballistic missile, Russian designation 9K-720. NATO calls it the SS-26 Stone. It's a precision weapon, circular error probable of less than 5 meters. When Russia fires an Iskander, it hits what it aims at. This one launched from somewhere in occupied Crimea. The exact site will be identified later through satellite forensics and traced a ballistic arc 50 kilometers high before descending at Mach 7. Target: a 9-story residential building on Heroiv Street. The missile strikes at 3:47 a.m. It penetrates 3 floors before detonating. The explosion is catastrophic. The central structure collapses immediately. 32 apartments are obliterated. 47 others are damaged beyond habitability. Emergency services arrive within 16 minutes. They pull survivors from rubble for the next 14 hours. Final toll: 17 dead, 43 injured. Among the dead, Oksana Petrenko, 34, mathematics teacher. Her daughter Mila, 7. Andriy Sokolov, 52, bus driver. His wife Natalia, 48. Katerina Bondar, 29, pregnant, 6 months along. These aren't statistics. They're erasures. Lives that ended not because of military necessity, but because someone decided terror was a tactic. Now here's the critical question. Why this building? There's no military installation nearby. No ammunition depot, no command post, no concealed artillery. Ukrainian officials verified this immediately, knowing the world would ask. The nearest strategic target is a railway junction 3 kilometers away. If Russia wanted to hit logistics, they could have, they didn't. So why? Because the point isn't military, it's psychological. This is what strategists call coercive violence, attacking civilians to break morale, to make a population demand their government surrender. Russia has done this systematically. Energy infrastructure in winter, shopping centers, train stations, apartment buildings. The goal is to make ordinary Ukrainians say, "This isn't worth it. Let's give Putin what he wants and end this." It hasn't worked. Ukrainian resolve has hardened, not fractured. But every strike tests that resolve. And every strike forces Ukraine's allies to answer a question. What are you willing to do about it? For 3 years, the answer has been sanctions, weapons, condemnation. This time, it was different. The statement drops at 6:52 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, December 8th. Not from the State Department, not from a Pentagon briefing, from the National Security Council, the president's inner circle on matters of war and peace. Here's the full text. The Russian Federation's deliberate targeting of civilian populations in Dnipro constitutes a grave violation of international humanitarian law. The United States has communicated directly to Russian leadership that continued attacks of this nature will result in material consequences. This is not a rhetorical warning. Read that last sentence again. This is not a rhetorical warning. That's not how diplomacy works. Diplomacy is the art of saying, "nice dog," while looking for a stick. Diplomacy is careful, ambiguous, deniable. This is none of those things. Material consequences means action, not words. And explicitly stating this is not rhetorical removes any ambiguity about intent. This is a threat, direct, public, unambiguous. Within hours, the statement is backed by action. The Pentagon announces a $2.7 billion military aid package for Ukraine, not gradual release, immediate transfer. Authorization for Ukraine to use American-supplied ATACMS missiles range 300 kilometers against any Russian military target, including those on Russian soil. No restrictions. Expanded intelligence sharing protocols, real-time satellite data, electronic warfare support, targeting assistance, deployment of 2 additional Patriot air defense batteries to Ukraine. This isn't incremental escalation. This is a doctrinal shift. For nearly 4 years, U.S. policy has been defined by limitations. Yes, we'll give you weapons, but not long-range ones. Yes, you can defend yourselves, but don't strike Russian territory. Yes, we support your sovereignty, but don't give Putin an excuse for escalation. Those limitations just evaporated. Why? Because the calculus changed, not gradually, suddenly. 3 factors converged. First, North Korean troops. As of November 2025, an estimated 12,000 North Korean soldiers are fighting alongside Russian forces in Kursk Oblast. That's not advisory support. That's combat deployment. The war has internationalized not through proxies, but through direct belligerence. Second, Iranian weapon shipments. Since September, Iran has delivered over 3,000 Shahed 136 kamikaze drones to Russia, not smuggled, not covert, openly transported by military cargo aircraft. The Tehran-Moscow axis is operational. Third, domestic pressure. American voters are exhausted by foreign wars, but they're also exhausted by weakness. The images from Dnipro children pulled from rubble, families destroyed, generated outrage. Congressional phones lit up. Editorial boards demanded action. The political cost of inaction exceeded the political cost of escalation. So Washington escalated. But here's the dangerous part. Putin now faces a choice. Back down and look weak to his domestic audience, his military, his allies, or double down and risk a confrontation he might not control. Neither option is safe. And that's what makes this moment so volatile. Ukraine didn't wait for permission. December 9th, 2:17 a.m. Moscow time. An oil depot in Voronezh Oblast, 380 kilometers inside Russia, erupts into flames. The explosion is visible from space. Infrared satellites capture the thermal bloom. 6 storage tanks, each holding 10,000 cubic meters of refined petroleum, burning simultaneously. This isn't a lucky strike. This is precision. Source: Ukrainian manufactured long-range drones. The R-360 Neptune, adapted for ground attack. Range: over 400 kilometers. Warhead: 150 kilograms. By dawn, 3 more strikes. Ammunition depot near Bryansk. Secondary explosions continue for 11 hours. Railway bridge outside Kursk. Critical logistics route severed. Air defense radar station in Belgorod Oblast. Russia's early warning capability degraded. This is combined arms, coordinated, calculated, and it represents a fundamental shift in Ukrainian strategy. Let me explain the doctrine. For 2 years, Ukraine fought defensively, hold territory, minimize casualties, attrite Russian forces. The goal was survival, not victory. Then came the 2023 counteroffensive, ambitious but ultimately stalled. Ukraine learned a hard lesson. You can't win a war of attrition against an opponent with 3 times your population and 10 times your artillery shells. So they adapted. The new doctrine is called deep operations, a term borrowed from Soviet military theory. The idea: you don't just fight the enemy at the front line, you fight their logistics, their command structure, their ability to sustain operations. You make the war expensive, unsustainable. Here's how it works. Target fuel depots. Tanks don't run on patriotism. They run on diesel. Destroy fuel storage, and you force Russia to divert resources to protection, transportation, and redundancy. Every liter burned in transit is a liter not available at the front. Target ammunition. Russia fires an estimated 20,000 artillery shells per day. Those shells have to be stored, transported, and distributed. Hit the depots, and you create shortages. Shortages create rationing. Rationing creates battlefield defeats. Target infrastructure. Rail lines, bridges, command posts. These aren't glamorous targets, but modern war runs on logistics. Break the logistics, and the front collapses not because soldiers lose courage, but because they run out of bullets. Ukraine has been building toward this for months. Domestic drone production has scaled up. Manufacturing plants hidden in western Ukraine churn out hundreds of drones per month. They're not as sophisticated as American weapons, but they don't need to be. They need to fly 400 kilometers and explode. And they're doing exactly that. The implications are profound. Russia now has to defend a 2,000-kilometer border with Ukraine using air defenses designed to protect frontline positions. Every S-400 battery moved from the Donbass to Voronezh is one fewer battery protecting Russian troops from Ukrainian airstrikes. It's a strategic dilemma. Protect the rear and weaken the front. Protect the front and suffer strikes deep in your territory. This is what military theorists call strategic attrition. And it's working. Russian logistics are already strained. Fuel shortages have been reported near Donetsk. Ammunition rationing has forced Russian artillery to reduce fire rates. These aren't catastrophic shortages, not yet, but they're accumulating, and accumulation is how wars are lost. But here's the risk. Every Ukrainian strike inside Russia gives Putin justification for escalation. Mobilization, broader target sets, perhaps even, God forbid, nuclear rhetoric made real. Ukraine is betting that Russia can't afford to escalate, that Putin's military is too degraded, his economy too fragile, his options too limited. They might be right, or they might be triggering something no one can control. December 10th, 2025. 17 people dead in Dnipro, a U.S. warning issued. Ukrainian forces striking deep into Russia, North Korean troops fighting in Europe, Iranian drones over Ukrainian cities. And you sitting wherever you are wondering what this means for you. Let me tell you, This matters because the rules that govern international behavior aren't laws of nature. They're agreements, fragile agreements that depend on enforcement. When Russia can obliterate apartment buildings without facing consequences that hurt, every other authoritarian learns the lesson: power without accountability works. When territorial conquest is met with sanctions but not surrender, borders become negotiable. When democracies hesitate while dictatorships act, the balance tips. This isn't abstract geopolitics. This is the foundation of the world you live in, the one where commercial aircraft don't get shot down, where trade routes stay open, where conflicts stay regional instead of global. That foundation is cracking. And the only question that matters is whether we repair it or watch it collapse. So what do? You pay attention. You demand that your leaders take this seriously, not as a distant problem, but as a test of whether international order means anything. You reject false equivalencies. Yes, every war involves tragedy, but not every war involves deliberately targeting civilians as policy. You recognize that distance doesn't equal safety, that what happens in Dnipro or Kharkiv or Mariupol creates precedents that echo everywhere. And you remember that history is made of moments like this, moments when the trajectory could bend, when the choices made by leaders and citizens determine whether the future is one of resilience or ruin. We're in one of those moments now. The warning has been issued. Ukraine has responded. Putin must decide what comes next. And all of us, whether we realize it or not, are part of that decision. Because wars are sustained by populations, by economies, by the willingness of people to accept what's happening or demand something different. The next chapter of this story hasn't been written yet, but it will be written soon. The question is whether we'll look back and say we did enough, or whether we'll wonder why we didn't see it coming. Tonight, the choice is still ours. Tomorrow, it might not be. Asterisk. Asterisk.